Oh, I didn't see you there. Hi, I'm Indy, and this is another exciting episode of Out of the Trenches, where I sit here in the chair of wisdom and answer all your questions about the First World War. Lily Mackey from Patreon writes, how much of the Verdun battlefield is still off limits today? Can you tell us about other areas still affected by unexploded shells? Love the show. They estimate that around 1 out of 3 shells fired in the Great War didn't explode. Now that's a hell of a lot. Every year, up to 150 tons of old shells and unexploded ammunition are unearthed on just the Western Front. Farmers in Flanders and northern France are still plagued by unexploded ammunition, pieces of shrapnel, rusty rifles. They call it the Iron Harvest, and it still happens that people die because of buried duds in the ground on which people stumble during, say, roadworks or construction, and they'll go off. So even 100 years later, after the initial fighting, the Great War still kills people. Now, the battlefield around Verdun is still littered with unexploded shells, shrapnel pieces, bullet fragments. Sometimes they will unearth like whole bunkers or lost and buried over trenches with the remains of soldiers still inside. The biggest problem is that because of the use of poison gas, a lot of the grounds there are still toxic to some degree, and they prevent wildlife from coming back or even trees growing. Verdun itself has not only become, as you'd imagine, a place of enormous cultural significance, but it's also opened its military history for tourists. So you would be able to enter most of the forts and a lot of the surrounding, except for certain areas that are off limits because of the danger. But you can find the scars of the Great War on practically every old battleground. Sometimes you can even see rusted barbed wire or the ruins of bunkers. But treat the remains with care. You can never be sure what lays hidden and forgotten beneath the surface. Jeff Hausman from Patreon writes, hi Indy, my grandfather fought in France during World War I. While in the trenches, he contacted dysentery and was sent to a hospital. While there, the staff learned he was a great piano player. Okay, I think got my attention now. He was teamed up with a nurse who could sing. They performed to entertain the sick and wounded in the hospital for the rest of the war. This was all pre-USO. Question, what did the armies do to provide entertainment for their troops? Excellent show. Well, thank you. Entertainment, both in and out of the trenches, was a big factor for the morale on every side. I mean, they were soldiers, but they were also normal men who needed time to get their minds off of the brutal reality that they were living in, or just to fight off nervousness or boredom. As they would leave the trenches during the trench cycle, when they'd go back to the rear, when it was their turn, there were usually all sorts of distractions, depending on the overall situation of the front lines, of course. Whatever cheers the warrior helps to win the war. That was the motto of the British music department. Usually, soldiers would attend theaters or small concerts, or would simply enjoy a good meal or some cheerful singing with their comrades. The man in need was usually allowed to visit the brothel, enjoy alcohol, or play games with his comrades. Officers had their own casinos and brothels, of course. Can't mix in with the enlisted men. Although it was not the days when, say, helicopters would drop off supermodels to entertain troops in packed stadiums. There was nothing spectacular like that. The entertainment available would still create a sense of safety and normality. We often forget how precious just like a simple shower or a good night's sleep in an actual bed, or just time to write a letter home without artillery or something. During the few days away from danger, we forget how comforting that can be. Wounded or ill soldiers, often could not participate in those activities. But listening to piano players like your grandfather was very often a well-appreciated distraction. Soldiers that were seriously wounded, like they'd had amputated limbs or something, and never went back to the front, usually were sent to military hospitals back in their home countries where they had a more planned out time of recreations, more like the works of the USO that you mentioned. The USO, the United Service Organization, would later become vital for US troops in the Second World War and would set new standards on how to keep up morale. Carl Axel Knutsen writes, "Hey Indy and team." Hey Carl Axel Knutsen. "I'm from Sweden, but my grandmother was from Estonia, coming from a Baltic German family of lesser nobility." I read my grandmother's memoirs in which she mentions her 3 older brothers who were all sent to fight on the Eastern Front in Russian service. They never came home and their fates are unclear. Considering their cultural backgrounds, I sometimes wonder if any of them ever tried to defect to the Central Powers. Was it a common thing that soldiers would sneak across no man's land to switch sides? And were they even welcomed by the side having these soldiers coming over to them? Shampapour, which means keep fighting. Shampapour, and many, many thanks for your great videos. Okay, well, because of the multiculturalism of many of the empires, the fear of fraternization of certain ethnic groups with the enemy nation was often a real problem. It's sometimes difficult to separate historical evidence from exaggerated blame for failures or simple propaganda. But we know, for example, that some Czech battalions switched sides in the beginning of the war and joined the Russian Empire's forces. We know that. Ethnic groups usually had their own regiments because of languages and customs. Now, to solve this problem, the empires would usually not send troops of, let's call it, uncertain allegiance to fight close to their homelands. Like the Germans would send troops from Alsace to fight on the Eastern Front. Men from the Baltic would fight for the Russians further south, maybe even as far south as the Caucasus. And Austria-Hungary would send, say, Croatian regiments to fight with the Sud Armée over in the east. There were the legions, like the Czech or Polish Legion, that defected for the cause of fighting for the independence of their country. People from the Italian-speaking part of Austria-Hungary would defect from the Austro-Hungarian Empire into the Italian army to fight against the occupation of the Trentino. And Ottoman Armenians would join the Russian army, and so on. Technically, all of these defectors were guilty of high treason, and if they were captured by their old army, there are no prisoner of war laws on earth that would save them from the death sentence. But in time, we will actually do extra episodes about minorities of the empires. And speaking of Armenia, if you'd like to see our special about Armenia before the war, you can click right here to check that out. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter, and we're on Instagram too. And don't forget to subscribe either. See you next time.